Shkalim Pergvav Mishnah Aleph. Shleisha Asr Shayfer, Shleisha Asr Shulchana, Shleisha Esrei Shtachavoyis Hayu B'Mikdash. The Azar of the Beis Hamikdash had two boxes into which people could deposit their shkalim. Those were part of a group of 13 boxes into which people could deposit money for the karbanos they owed, or for Nadarim and Nadavis that they had made. The Mishnah begins by stating how many boxes there were and lists the other features in the Beis Hamikdash that were of the same number. There were 13 shefaros, 13 shulchanos, 13 tables, and 13 ishtachavoyos in the Beis Hamikdash. And we know that the 13 ishtachavoyos, we're going to explain later, has a lot to do with Hanukkah. Mr. Shem, we could talk about it Hanukkah, but 13 is Gematria Echad, as we know, Gematria Ava, and that's what the Beis Hamikdash stood for. We explained earlier that these boxes were called shefaros because they were shaped somewhat like a shofar, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom with a curved neck, which made it impossible for a person to reach into the box and to remove the coins while pretending to put them in. When a person entered the Beis Hamikdash, people would move to the right and circle around the Beis Hamikdash to reach their destination. They would always turn towards the right. When they would leave, they would continue around and exit to the left of where they came in. The Chachamim were gozer that as people made their way around the Beis Hamikdash, they should bow all the way to the ground 13 times in 13 designated places. And we'll explain this later on in Mishnah Gimel, through Mishnah Hay. Shal Beis Rabban Gamliel v'Shal Beis Reb Chanina Skana Kohanim, members of the household of Reb Gamliel and the household of Reb Chanina Skana Kohanim. We mentioned him in Pesachim Parak Aleph. Hayom Mishtachman Arba Esrei. They would bow down 14 times. Where was the additional one? Keneged Eitzim, opposite the room of the wood chamber. The wood was used for the fires that for the Mizbeach. It was stored in a room known as the Lishkas HaEitzim, the Dir HaEitzim, which was located in the northeast corner of the Ezras Noshim, as it states in Midis Perik Beis. Now, what's this Maisa? The Aron always comes with a Mesorah. As it states in Gemara, that there's a Mesorah, that the Makkah Ma'arin and Minamida that we have, the Gemara Megillah, or elsewhere, that it's also a Mesorah B'Yoda. The whole Aron represents the Torah. Torah has to come with a Mesorah, and without that, it's nisht. They have a Mesorah that the Aron was hidden in an underground chamber beneath its floor, and they would therefore bow when passing this area out of respect to the Aron that was hidden beneath it. They were being mishtachava to the Makom Gnizas HaAron. Towards the end of the first Beis Hamikdash, Yoshio was informed by Chulda Hanaviah that the Bavliim would soon destroy the Beis Hamikdash and take the Yidden to Golos, into Bavel. So to prevent the Aron, which contained the Luchas, from falling into foreign hands, he commanded that it be hidden in the underground chambers beneath the Mikdash. These chambers were built lechatchila by Shlomo HaMelech, who saw Benavua the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash to provide a safe hiding place for the Aron. Other items that had been kept in the Kodesh HaKadoshim were also hidden underground, including the jar of man, preserved from the days in the Midbar, the flask of Shemen HaMishcha, and the Mata Aaron with the Perach, with the Shkedim and Prachim on it, were also there. And the Gemara in Shalcha, the Gemara in Saita talks about Shalcha Med La'olam, with David, that Lo Shalta Ba Zarim, on the handiwork of David HaMelech. Tavu B'aretz She'areha, the Pasuk in Eicha says that the gates of the Beis Hamikdash sunk into the ground, meaning that it was nignaz. Even though B'der Chlal we say that the chiluk between the Mikdash and the Mishkan was nignaz, and we know from the Chedush Harim Zvartan that the light of the menorah is still burning, and that's the Sfas Emes brings in the Chanukah multiple times. And that's the concept of the Haftacha to Aaron after the Parashat and Nesiyim of the Parashat Vad Lokas HaMenorah Shel Chaymed Lo'ilam. That's Chaymed Lo'ilam Afilim in the Golos. And the Beis Hamikdash mitzad itself was Nechrav, but part of the Beis Hamikdash, the Aron, the Torah is still here. It's just interesting that it's next to the Dir HaEitzim, because in the Aron itself was Zahav, and the outer of the Aron was Zahav, and the innermost box of the Aron was Zahav, but then there was the Eitzim part, which, as we know, is the name Mechaper and the Eitz Hadas, And so it was next to the Makam Dir Ha'etzim, and Vaiter Mastama working to be masaking the Chet of the Machishim, Mishnah Beis. So these people had a Maseicha, these people didn't have a Maseicha. So the people that were Mishtachav, I mean the Tanakama that says that were Mishtachav 13 times, who didn't bow opposite the Dir Eitzim, had a Maseicha that the Aron was not hidden at all, but in fact can be carried into Golus Baba. Mishnah Beis. There's once an incident with a certain kohen who was busying himself doing his job in the wood chamber. He was busy at his job of picking out the wormy pieces of wood. Since wormy wood may not be burnt on the Mizbeach, this task was assigned to a kohanim who had a mum, and they were not able to do the avodah. And he saw that one of the floor tiles was in a different position, or looked differently than the other ones, and it was not aligned with them. One tile was slightly higher than the others. When the kohen saw this, he concluded that the tile had once been removed, presumably to hide the Aron, and then replaced. Although King Yoshio hid the Aron while the first Beis HaMikdash was still standing, and this incident took place in the second Beis HaMikdash many, many years later, apparently the floor of the Beis HaMikdash hadn't changed significantly since the times of Yoshio HaMelech. Despite the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, the floor had remained intact. I was like, Shaila, the Pashas, the floor of the Mikdash is a Makom Kodesh. Now, maybe under the floor is different. That's a separate shmuz, right? Like what's on top of the roof of the Beis HaMikdash, that's also a Shaila. The Gemara discussed if it's Kaddish. But the Ritzvah Hazara, Zechar is Kedusha, the gewisse levels of Kedusha. So he went and told his friend where he had seen it, and he was about to disclose the location of the unusual tile. Like his speak, he did not manage to finish describing the matter before his soul departed. The kohen died because of a heavenly decree that the exact location of the Aron remains unknown until the Geula HaAsida. So it would make perfect sense to say that there's a machlekes on a story. Well, it's a kadosh v'maisa. Well, what happened? So really, it goes back to that Gemara that we mentioned earlier, the Makam Aron Einem and Amida. The Hainu that Adayam Mazeh, Makam Aron Einem and Amida. Could be it exists under the Beis HaMikdash, and could be it exists somewhere in Bavel, in the Vatican. Who knows where? But Al Gapanim, it's not something that we could know, as I state in the Tveres Yisrael. The Yoda b'yichud sheshom Aron Nignaz. Then they knew with certainty that the Aron was hidden beneath the floor of the wood chamber, meaning they drew this conclusion from the fact that he died while trying to relate what he had noticed. Now it was interesting. So then there was a vise that we were just miyash of this child that we said. But this person was megala this Einem and Amida thing, so he was also no longer min Amida. Okay, Mishnah Gimel, and where did the people bow in the Beis HaMikdash? Arba Batzafan, 4 Hishtachavois were performed in the north of the Azar. The Arba Badarim, 4 Hishtachavois were done in the south of the Azara. Shalosh B'Mizrach, 3 in the east, Shtein B'Marav, and 2 in the west. Kineged Shleishas Tisharim, these bows, these Hishtachavois were performed opposite the 13 gates of the Azara. People would bow as they passed each gate to demonstrate the Haidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the beauty of the Beis HaMikdash, as they caught a glimpse of the beauty of the Beis HaMikdash by looking through the gates, by looking through the Shi'orim. And Shi'orim Dremiyim Smuchel L'Mayrav, these are the names of the gates on the south side of the Azara, beginning with those nearest to the west. Shar HaElyon, the upper gate was closest to the west. The Harabayas sloped upwards from east to west, so that the gate nearest to the west side stood at a higher point than those to its east. So the southern gate closest to the west side of the Azara was called the Shar HaElyon because it was higher up. Shar HaDelek, the kindling gate, through which the wood for the Mizbeach's fires were brought into the Azara, were on its east. Shar B'Cheres. The next gate to the east was the gate of the firstborns, in which firstborn Karbonis, meaning the B'Cheres, were brought into the Chaser. B'Char, again, is the male firstborn of a sheep, cow, or goat. It's Kaddish when it's born, and it must be given to a kohen, who then brings it as a carbon and eats the meat. The carbon of a B'Char may be shechted in the southern half of the Azara. They were therefore generally led into the Chatzar through the southern gate, which was near the place where they would shecht it. Shar HaMayim, the gate closest to the east, was called the Shar HaMayim. What was the reason that the fourth gate was called the water gate? No, this is not a water gate scandal. This was a gate where they would bring water through. Because through it, they would bring in the flask of water that was poured on the Mizbeach during the Simchas Beis Sheva on Sukkot. Every morning during the Yom Tov of Sukkot, a flask of water was brought from the Shiloach, which was a spring that was outside the Beis Hamikdash, into the Azara, and poured into one of the two bowls on the southwest corner of the Mizbeach. And this gateway was chosen because it was closest to the Kavesh that was leading to the top of the Mizbeach, so they were just marching right through there, and it was part of the Simcha. But this was the Iker Simcha, Simchas Beis Sheva. What's so exciting about water? So that we need to give a whole mimer on Sukkot for Beis Hashem. Rabbi Lezer ben Yankov Aimer, Rabbi Lezer ben Yankov says, Boy hamayim mefachim va'asidum liyas yitzim tachas mitzvah abayis. Rabbi Lezer ben Yankov says that through this gate the water will flow as from the mouth of a small flask when in the times of when Mashiach comes, it's destined to come out from beneath the threshold of the Beis HaMikdash. This is based on a nevuah of Yecheskel, that Yecheskel had a nevuah of a vision of the rebuilt Beis HaMikdash when Mashiach is going to come. And in that nevuah, he saw a trickle of water the width of a locust's horns, the antennas of a locust, which will originate under the Makam HaMikdash, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and expand to the width of the mouth of a flask by the time it reaches the southeastern gate. And the southeastern gate was named the water gate in anticipation of this nevuah. Now, it could be that both of these things are true, and Min Hastam, this nevuah, has a lot of shaykhs to the Nusach HaMayim as well. Opposite these gates in the north, beginning with those nearest to the west side of the Chatzar, to the Azara, were Shar Yechanya, the gate of Yechanya, Shar HaKarban, followed by the gate of the Karban, through which karbanos that were needed to be shechted in the northern half of the Azara were brought in. Anything that's kachim, such as Ha'olah, Chatzar, or Asham, must be shechted in the northern half of the Azara and the Tzafay. Shar Noshim, the women's gate, the women who wished to be in the Beis HaMikdash when their animals were brought as karbanos could enter the Azara through this gate. Shar Hashir, the gate of the song, through which the musical instruments used in the Beis HaMikdash were brought in. The musical instruments were brought into the Azara through the northeastern gate because this gate was closest to the Beis HaMitbachayim, the butchering place where Kohanim sounded trumpets before pouring wine on the Mizbeach every day. Why was it called Shar Yechanya? Because it was through this gate that King Yechanya left the Azara for the last time as he was being exiled, as we know from the story of, even if we don't know the story of Yechanya, but we know the story of the Megillah, and it says, Im Yechanya Melech Yehuda. So in the last parak we had Mordechai, in this parak we have Yechanya. Yechanya, or Yehoiachin, was one of the last kings of Malchus Yehuda to rule in Yerushalayim before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and his reign was cut short when Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel besieged the city and took the entire royal household captive. Shtei Malachim Beis, parak Chof Dalet. Before being led off to Golus, Yechanya entered the Chatzar to be Mishtachaveh and to take leave for the final time. He was then led from the Azara through this gateway. So as to be mazkir, this story that the Golus Bavel, because even in the Beis HaMikdash, they had a lot of people there, but there was large contingencies of Klal Yisrael that didn't come back, and this shar was like a reminder for that, I guess. Mizrach Shar Nikanor, the gates in the eastern wall of the Azar were Shar Nikanor, as we know from the Gemara Yuma, that it's Mefurish B'Yuma the Flamet Ches. A righteous man named Nikanor once traveled to Alexandria to make special copper doors for the main entrance of the Azara. On his return trip to Eretz Yisrael, to the port of Akku, strong winds threatened to sink the ship. The sailors took one of the massive doors and threw it into the sea to lighten the ship's load, yet the ship still remained in danger. The sailors then decided to throw the other door overboard as well. But Nicanor embraced it, insisting that if they throw it overboard, they throw him into the sea with it. With that, the raging sea immediately subsided. Nevertheless, Nicanor remained pained over the loss of the first door. When he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, however, it was discovered that the first door had miraculously followed them the entire way, and the Shnei Pishpish and Hayulai, which also had two smaller gateways within it, Echad B'Mina, Echad B'Smaila, one on the right and one on the left. The Shar Nicanor, which is the main entrance to the Azar, had two smaller gateways built into a larger gateway. So there was two massive doors of Shar Nicanor. Each had a small door built into it to allow for easy access when the massive doors were closed. And then there were two anonymous gates on the western wall of the Chatzar, which did not have a name. The two western gates of the Chatzar of the Azara led to the space between the western wall and the Azara, and that of the Arabais behind it. Since that space was relatively small, the Sha'arim leading to that space were hardly ever used, except perhaps to flee from enemies, so they were never named, they didn't have a specific use. And maybe they'll have a name when we get back to the third base of Mikdash Meher V'Yamein. Mishnah Daled. Shloisha Asur Shulchanos Hay B'Mikdash. There were 13 tables in the base of Mikdash. Shmona Shal Shaish B'Beis HaMitbachayim. 8 tables of marble stood in the butchering place in the north of the Mizbeach. The butchering place was where most karbanos were shechted, skinned, cut up, and rinsed, and was located in the area north of the Mizbeach. Shalem Medichim Esakrivayim. On these tables, the Kohanim rinsed the intestines of the karbanos. After an oila was cut up, its intestines had to be rinsed before being placed on the Mizbeach. The rinsing was done on these 8 tables. I guess they would have water. We spoke before that there was a little stream that was running through the Beis HaMikdash, so they were able to take water from there. I guess they brought buckets of water, or from the Kiyar. Ushnayim B'Marav HaKevesh, and 2 more tables stood west of the ramp leading up to the Mizbeach. On the south side of the Mizbeach, a ramp 32 amos long led to its top, and these 2 tables stood between the ramp and the rest of the Mikdash. Echad shel shayish v'echad shel kesef. One made of marble and one made of silver. Al shel shayish v'yinosin es evarim. On the marble table, they would place the evarim of a oila that were ready to be burnt. An oila had to be cut up into a certain number of specific pieces, and once it was cut up, the pieces were placed on the marble table. Although most kalim in the Beis HaMikdash were made of gold or silver, this was an exception because meat was placed on it. A metal table would keep the meat warm and possibly cause it to spoil, that the meat never spoiled. A marble table, on the other hand, kept the meat cool and preserved its freshness, even though we know that miraculously no meat of a carbon ever spoiled in the Beis HaMikdash. V'yishtein Pirkei Avos. It's improper to be semich al hanes. This table was therefore made of marble, which protects against spoiling naturally. Okay, and they remained on that table until the Kohanim carried them to the Mizbeach. Al shel kesef kli sharis. On the silver table, they were placed in 93 kli sharis used in the daily avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. 93 utensils were used during the daily avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. They were taken out each morning and placed on this silver table. There were 2 more tables located inside the ulam, which was a hallway in front of the heichal, which is actually wider than the heichal, which was 100 amos wide. Echad shel shayish v'echad shel zahav. One table was made of marble and one was made of gold. On the marble table, the Kohanim would place a freshly baked lechem apanim on its way to the kodesh, the heichal. Lechem apanim, we explained what they were. They would bake it every week. And the next Shabbos, the loaves were removed and divided among the Kohanim. They were replaced with freshly baked loaves. So it remained on that table until the Kohanim moved it to the shulchan inside the kodesh. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. On the golden table, they placed the lechem apanim on its way out of the Beis HaMikdash, and that's where the Kohanim then divided it among themselves. The Mishnah explains why the second table inside the ulam had to be made of gold. The Mishnah is explaining why the second table in the ulam had to be made of gold, even though the second table in the maravai shalom mizbeach was made out of silver. This one had to be made out of gold. There's the yisoid that we have, that we ascend in matters of kedusha and we do not descend. The Gemara Menachos derives this yisoid from a pasuk. Based on this yisoid, this halacha, they transfer the fresh lechem apanim onto the marble table in the ulam, from the marble table in the ulam to the gold table in the heichal, since gold is a step up from marble. Once placed on the gold table, lechem apanim couldn't be moved to a table made of anything that was less chashuv than gold, because then that's being murdered, and we're only ma'ila, we're not murdered. Since the lechem apanim have been placed on the gold table, and the Mishnah will soon say, so it'd be inappropriate to move it to an inferior silver table. There was one more table of gold inside the kodesh, which the lechem apanim lay continuously. I guess it was right next to the shulchan, or maybe we're talking about the shulchan itself. Mishnah Hey. There were 13 shofars in the Beis HaMikdash, v'kasav alein, and there was a label describing the purpose. There was probably a plaque describing the purpose of the contents written on each one of these boxes. And this is what was written on them: Tiklin Charitan and Taklin Atikin, New Shkalim and Old Shkalim, Kinin v'Goizle Oila, bird pairs and young Oila birds. The Mishnah will explain the difference between new and old Shkalim, as well as the meaning of bird pairs and young Oila birds. Eitzim, wood that was used to fuel the fire on the Mizbeach. Lavoinus, frankincense, a type of incense that's burned on the Mizbeach. Zahav, zahav l'kapiras, gold for the kapiras. Shishal and Adava, and the 6 remaining boxes, Shkalim designated for voluntary communal offerings, were deposited. If someone pledged a certain amount of gold to purchase a Klisharis, they would place that amount of gold or coins of an equal value in the collection box marked in the Zav Kapiros. Similarly, anyone pledging to give wood or levoina to the Beis HaMikdash would place the value pledged in that box marked for that purpose. Like some shuls, they have for the Bedek Habayis of the shul, and then they have for the Kinyan Svarim, then they have for the electric, then they have for the Kiddush, then they have for the coffee, then they have for the schnapps. They have different funds in the shul, so this over here also had different funds. And the Shishal and the Dava. There are 5 types of offerings, 5 types of karbanos, who the extra money is used to pay for the voluntary nadarim and nadavas of Eilis, or for Ketan Mizbeach. These 5 karbanos are Chatas, Asham, Kinezavin, Zavais, and Yaldais, and karbanos of a Nazir, and Ashram and Tzera. A separate box was established for the extra funds of each of these karbanos. If money was left over from the funds of a person designated for buying one of these karbanos, the owner would deposit that extra in the appropriate box marked with the Meiser Chatas or Meiser Asham. The 6th of these boxes was for someone who wanted to donate money towards the purchase of voluntary karbanos tzibor, nadar, and nadavis, and it was marked simply nadavis. Taklin charatin shabachal shana v'shana. New shkalim refers to the shkalim of each year, the shekel that each individual had to give that year, as we spoke in the beginning of the Masechta. Va'atikin mishal shakal ashtaka shekel shana haba. The old shkalim are those of someone who didn't bring a shekel during the previous year, who therefore gives an additional shekel during the coming year. This additional shekel is deposited in the box marked old shkalim. Taklin atikin. As such, one collection box was for this year's shkalim, and one was for shkalim not paid in the previous year. Kinan ein Torah goes le'olehim b'nei yoina. Shkalim in the box marked bird pairs were used to buy mature turtle doves, and those in the chest marked young oila birds were used to buy young pigeons with chul and oilos, and all of these Torah and b'nei yoina were offered as voluntary personal oila offerings. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, as is like Rabbi Yehuda. B'chacham ha'imrim kinan echad chatos v'echad oila v'goyz le'oila kul and oilos. Bird pairs was that money was for people who were obligated to bring a pair of birds, when as a chatas, when as an oila, but all the karbanos brought from the funds in the chest marked young oila birds are nadarim and nadavis. Even funds for voluntary karbanos of Tahirim and b'nei yoina were placed in this box to make sure that the right kind of bird was used. The outside of each packet would state whether the money was to be used to purchase a tar or b'nei yoina. B'kitzer, according to Yehuda, the difference between the 2 chests is that the bird pair's chest was used to collect money for karbanos of mature turtle doves, which were Tahirim, and goes the oila or b'nei yoina, while the young oila bird chest was used to collect money for offerings of young pigeons. Both were brought as the Nadarim and Nadav. According to the Chacham, the difference was that the kinei goes the oila, the kinei oila was used for chayvis, and the young oila bird chest was used for nadarim and nadavis. B'chacham ma'amrim kinan echachatas v'echad oila v'goyz li'oila kulan oilos. Mishnah Vav. Ha'omer harei le'etzim le'yivches mishnei gizrim. The previous Mishnah lists separate collection chests for wood, levoina, and zahav for klisharis. When a person vowed to give wood or one of the other items listed to the Beis HaMikdash, he had the option of donating the wood itself or contributing enough money to buy the wood. If he decides to give money, he places it in the appropriate chest and the kahana buy the wood for him. So somebody said, I hereby accept upon myself to contribute pieces of wood for the Mizbeach. I may not bring less than 2 blocks of wood, as large as those used on the Mizbeach. If he wishes to give money instead of bringing the wood, he must deposit enough money for those 2 blocks of wood in the chest marked wood. Levoina. If he vowed to contribute levoina, he may not bring less than a kaimetz, which is an amount that fills the hollow formed by bending the 3 middle fingers over the palm, which is the amount of a levaina brought with a mincha offering. If he wishes to give money, he places enough money to buy a kaimetz in the chest marked with levaina. Zahav liyivches midin zahav. If he vowed to contribute a gold coin, he may not bring less than a gold dinner, which is the smallest gold coin. Shishul and Nadava, in the 6 remaining boxes, shkalim designated for voluntary karbanos tzibor were deposited. What would they do with this money that was designated for voluntary karbanos? Like oilus, they would buy extra communal oil offerings with it. On days when there were few other karbanos, the oilers were placed on the mizbeach after the other karbanos had been brought, so that the mizbeach could always be in use. So I state the reason that the the meat of these karbanos was offered to Hashem on the mizbeach, and the skins, the hides, were given to the Kehanim. The meat of any oil is burnt on the mizbeach, and the oil is given to the Kehanim. The following understanding of this pasuk was expounded by Yoyada the Kohen Gadol, was in the first place of Mikdash during King Yoash, was the king of Yehuda. Asham hu Asham Lashem. After discussing one type of Asham, an Asham Tali, which is an Asham brought by someone who's not sure whether he committed a sin for which a Chatas is brought, the pasuk says Asham hu Asham Lashem. The Torah says it's an Asham for that which he has become guilty. He shall bring an Asham to Hashem. It is an Asham implies that this Asham is treated like the other Ashams, whose meat is eaten by the Kehanim. At the end of the pasuk, it says Beferish, however, that this Asham goes to Hashem. Yoyada resolved this contradiction by explaining that the pasuk deals not with the actual Asham offering, but rather with a carbon that's brought with the Moisar Asham or any other carbon that atones for sin. Za'aklal. He interpreted it this way with a rule. Any surplus funds that come from money set aside for chatas or for an asham should be used to purchase oilus. And the meat is offered on the mizbeach to Hashem, and the hides are given to the Kehanim. In doing so, it comes that both parts of the pasuk are being mekuyim. Asham Lashem. The end of the pasuk is that the asham goes to Hashem, that the oila that's purchased with the money of the asham goes to Hashem, but asham l'kehanim. And the beginning of the pasuk says asham hu, or asham hu, means that the skin goes to the kehanim like any other asham. Since the collection boxes which contain the moisar asham and moisar chatas are used to buy oila, so that's where it comes from. It comes from this pasuk. V'omer, and there's another pasuk that says about this. Kesef Asham v'Kesef Chatos l'Yuva Beis Hashem l'Kehanim Yiyu. Asham money and Chatos money shall not be brought to the Beis Hamikdash, that shall be to the Kehanim. Now Yoyada surely would not have given to the Kehanim money that had been designated to buy a Chatos or Asham, which must obviously be used to buy the Karbonos. Rather, he must have given them some rights to the Moisar Chatos and Moisar Asham, that they receive the hides of these Karbonos, of these oilers that were purchased with these funds. This proves that it was Yoyada who first expounded that the surplus chatas and ashram funds are used to purchase the oila offering. Ad kan, Perek Vav.